This week, Bill Drummond and Jimmy Corty hit Liverpool in the KLF's legendary ice cream van to kick off Welcome to the Dark Ages. 3 days of subversive events, abetted by the likes of Pete Wiley and Jarvis Cocker, and it's a perfect excuse to dust off my 2004 in-depth interview with Bill Drummond, one of the most enjoyable experiences of my entire broadcasting career. I'm Tom Robinson, this is Six Music. Stand by for the first track picked by Bill Drummond as we enter the After Hour. You're listening to BBC6 Music. That's Strawberry Fields Forever, needless to say, by the Beatles. And the big surprise, though, is that it was the first record ever bought by my guest this evening, Bill Drummond. I'm sure it's the first record lots of people ever bought. But anyway, good evening, Tom. Good evening. Well, for somebody born in 1953... that would make you, what, 13 when that came out? 13 when it came out, but we'd only just got a record player. Okay. We got the record player that week. We had a wind-up one beforehand, but we got the record player that week, and I bought that record on Friday. In those days, I mean, there wasn't any question, are you a Beatles or a Stones fan? If you grew up in that era, you had to listen to both of them. They were like the oxygen that... Of course, that whole Beatles or Stones thing, that's just a thing that was made up at some point in the 70s, I think. People started saying that. It's strange, but there was a kind of Strawberry Fields or Penny Lane divide, wasn't there? Absolutely. You know, Penny Lane, I loved everything by the Beatles, but Penny Lane, for me, paled into insignificance compared to Strawberry Fields. What do you like about it, Sam? It just dragged you in and dragged you under and took you places you'd never been before, or a 13-year-old boy had never been before, and opened up the whole idea. I mean, I'm talking with hindsight here. The whole idea that pop music could be all sorts of things. It was just the mystery of the sound. And also they had this clip. I mean, people didn't talk about video clips in those days, obviously, but they had a clip that they showed on Top of the Pops of them. I think some of them were up a tree, and it was... Yes, it was that kind of freeze-frame animation sort of thing. Whatever. I mean, and obviously at the age of 13 I hadn't done any illegal things, but it seemed to... it was just... Yeah, it was sensational. That's a theme that's continued pretty much throughout your work. Pop music is much more than just pop music. That it has a whole set of cultural resonances, and in the end you've ended up, over the years... first through the conventional bands, and then through the less conventional KLF, and then finally through the K Foundation and the art work you've been involved in. Mm-hmm. You've been kind of trying to break down that barrier over the years, haven't you? I've always not consciously trying to break it down, but I know as much as I was drawn to music, I was drawn to the way, just the atmosphere that a band can create. It's not like I had heroes that I never had pin-up heroes. I never had, posters on my wall. But I liked bands that could play with just the aura around them, whether it was The Residents or Television or some of the German bands. But at the same time, I've always loved out-and-out pop music. So, at what point did you decide that you were going to be in a pop band as a young man? Oh no, that wasn't part of the equation at all. No, How did you stumble into being in Japan then? That was all by accident. No, I could play the guitar. I had a guitar as a teenager, and but I went to art school, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to. Well, once I got to art school, that was an accident. I was supposed to be an apprentice down the steelworks, but I ended up getting to art school, and so I was going to be a painter, and role of a Rembrandt. Bill Drummond's here. But that didn't work out. I realised pretty soon I wasn't going to be the next Rembrandt. And I also remember writing an essay, one had to do essays as well as pretend to be Rembrandt, and working out that the greatest piece of art that had been made in the 20th century was Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles. And part of the reason why I thought it was the greatest piece of art was that we could all buy it for... When I first bought it, it would have been 7 and 6pence, but... When I came to this realisation, it would have been something like 82 pence or something, and I just completely turned my back on the whole notion of making high art. Well, it's not so much the high art thing, but the one-off thing, the thing that can only be sold to one person, whether it's for 5 or 10 million quid. That's a theme we must return to a little later in this conversation. Let's set the scene. You grown up
at this point in Merseyside?
No. Scotland until the age of 11, and then a place called Corby in the East Midlands, big steel town, then. Went to Liverpool to go to art school when I was 19.
Okay, so you hadn't actually known the physical background of Strawberry Fields or anything until you actually went there?
No. And the cliche is, I went to Liverpool art school because John Lennon went there, which is sad and pathetic, but that's...
Let's hear Nothing Special. You're listening to BBC6 Music. That's Big in Japan, the first band that featured Bill Drummond.
That's correct, yes.
It was indeed. From 1977. And the band also featured...
Ian Brodie, at various times. Ian Brodie, Holly Johnson, Budgie, who went on to be with Susie and the Banshees, Jane Casey, who was our singer, she did do a thing called Pink Military afterwards, but they didn't go on to anything. Dave Balfe, who's been still my partner in certain things ever since, and he went to be keyboard player with Teardrop Explodes, and there was a couple of other people as well.
So it was really a foment of talent at that time.
I suppose it was, but we weren't, obviously we weren't aware of that.
But for instance, could Budgie play really good drums?
He was a fantastic drummer. He was the best drummer in Liverpool at the time.
Well, then you went on from being in a band quite quickly with David Balfe to forming Zoo Records, didn't you?
Yes. We used to all hang around a club called Eric's in Liverpool. And it was the classic corny. It was seeing the Clash on the 5th of May 1977 at Eric's. It was after that we decided, let's form a band, which is kind of corny, but I want to mention that. But just over a year later, we'd knocked the band on the head. We decided, this isn't... I mean, maybe there was just too many different characters kind of wanting to go different ways, but...
So then why a record label?
Through the first half of the 70s, I'd got into collecting... import American soul records, 7-inch, and they're all these independent. I hadn't heard of the word independent in those days, but they were labels from all sort of small towns in the southern states, and I loved these. I loved the colour of the labels, the way everything was printed on them, and that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to have one of those labels, but obviously I wasn't going to be putting out that sort of music, and I just turned to, or Dave Balfe and myself, we turned to friends, people we knew around us, said, do you want to put a record out? We're starting a record label, and that's how that started.
And it was a bit of a talented roster when you first signed them. Two of the biggest bands of the time, as they went on to be.
In a sense, yeah. Echo and the Bunnymen and the Teardrop Explodes. But we didn't sign. Not that we signed them. We didn't get involved with them, thinking these are great bands, or these have a future. Or these were just people, the only people we knew that had groups at the time, and so we decided to make and we didn't even think the records were that good.
Did you get involved in the production at that point?
Yes, from the beginning, yes. I mean, we soon tried to get proper producers, but...
Who did you get?
Dave Balfe and I did the first Bunnymen single, then we got Ian Brodie in to do the next one. We did Pictures on the Wall, Rescue. So he's not that he was a proper producer, but he knew more about production than Dave Balfe and I did, although we ended up doing the album. We got Clive Langer in to do work with the Teardrop Explodes. He'd lived in Liverpool. We knew him as a friend in Liverpool, although he'd started sort of doing production things down in London. So those were the closest to proper producers that we knew.
Well, let's check out Echo and the Bunnymen around. When would this track have been, Killing Moon?
84, yeah.
So this is a little later on.
It was, yeah.
This is what they went on to then.
Yeah.
Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen on BBC6 Music. You're listening to the Evening Sequence. I'm Tom Robinson. My guest this evening is Bill Drummond. I'm surprised you didn't pick one of the early ones like Rescue itself. I mean, personally, I preferred the raw, earlier Bunnymen, when there was this sense of danger that almost anything might happen. It had got a little bit manicured, hadn't it, by Killing Moon, don't you think?
No, I think you're wrong, Tom. I think Killing Moon is one of the most on-edge, unmanicured records ever made. And I think at the beginning, we were too scared of letting anything that sounded unmanicured. I mean, not that we could polish the production up that much, but for me, it is the edgiest thing they ever did.
Were you still involved with them at this point?
I was. That was the last... That came off the Ocean Rain album, and that was the last album that I was involved with.
So you were by now the manager rather than the record company?
Oh yeah, no, I was only the record company for the first indie single, and then I was forced into the position of being the manager, which I'd never the idea of being a manager of a band. I had no idea at all. I was old enough to hire a van, and that's about the only qualifications I had. I had a driving license.
In the light of some of the escapades you've got up to in terms of attracting the public attention, or perhaps just tapping into the public unconscious, did you actually come up with any scams or things that were able to push them further towards the public awareness than they would otherwise have got as a manager?
Obviously, I was trying to push the Bunnymen as much as I could in the only ways that I could. I mean, I can look back now, I can see these gross mistakes I made. I remember thinking they shouldn't go to America. They should, this is a kind of more European band. They should spend their time in Europe. And I remember the U2 meeting them a couple of times and saying, "Oh, we're off to America and we're doing a 3-month tour," and they were really determined to break it. And we just thought this was sad and pathetic. And obviously, from a commercial point of view, it might have been a lot better that the Bunnymen went off to America and spent they'd have fallen apart if they had done. It wouldn't have worked. So, but I was looking at it from a cynical management point of view, those are the sort of things that should have been done that I would have never done. I was far more interested in just the sound, where they played, why they played, the way they presented themselves. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I was more into the mystery that surrounds a band, or the tensions.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about your whole take on music, and it's why you've, for my money, done consistently interesting things, is that, for instance, in the manual, the KLF's guide on how to have a hit record, the advice is throw away your MIDI gear, don't tinker around with electronics, and if you're in a band, get out now, because those things detract from what it is that's often the most interesting thing about an artist.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I did, that's how it was, the book was, it was a, saying, if you're in a band, if you want a number one single, forget about a band, But really, what that book was about it was actually not really about music at all. It was about, I think, in my head anyway, it was about saying, if you want to do something, don't wait to be given permission. Just go ahead and do it. And it's up to you. Don't take no for an answer from anybody. No, don't let anybody say, "Well, I'm afraid you're not good enough. You haven't passed the test." You or the audition, to quote.
It is terrifically enabling. Well, now, can we backtrack a little bit?
Okay. Yep.
Around to the Eric scene.
Yep.
What other bands did you see there apart from the Clash?
And apart from the Tom Robinson band.
And the Tom Robinson band, indeed. Yeah, we put in our two pennyworth up there in due course.
I mean, I saw all the classic bands of the time. The Pistols.
How were they?
They were rubbish. They were absolutely. I was so disappointed. I mean, this was really, it was very early on, but I was really, really disappointed at how nothing it was.
So the Clash were better?
The Clash were completely and utterly stunning. I mean, it was showbiz as well. I mean, they had the clothes and all that, but Talking Heads, the Ramones, the Stranglers, so all the main ones, and then all the kind of less main ones, the Adverts and X-Ray Specs, who I loved. I loved them. I wouldn't have never wanted to hear an album. Oh, Bondage Up Yours, I just think it's the sentiment of that song just cut through all that kind of pretense political stuff that the Clash did, or pretend bad boy of the Pistols. There was something far more real about her, and far more dangerous. And the fact that it was a girl, and the fact it wasn't a glamorous girl, the fact that she had braces on her teeth, just everything about her. It said that thing, you can do this. We can all say, oh, bondage up yours, whatever we perceive our bondage to be. And not that I've heard that record for 10 years, but I'm sure if I was to hear it again today, I'd think it was probably the best British record out of that era.
Bill Drummond, your wish shall come true.
Some people think little girls should be seen.
Oh, Bondage Up Yours, X-Ray Specs, BBC6 Music. Bill Drummond is my guest. I'm Tom Robinson. This is the evening sequence. So, we've got you roundabout to the mid-80s here as a manager about to part company with Echo and the Bunnymen. The other name on the table was The Teardrop Explodes,
yep.
Followed by Julian Cope. What's your position regarding Julian Cope? You've traded insults via record, haven't you?
Nah, not really. You know, I mean, that's
Julian Cope is dead.
No, but actually, that's not what that song's about. It's actually based on a theory I had for Ian McCulloch. After Ian Curtis had killed himself, so I was thinking, can manage that for Ian McCulloch, you know, and so the whole idea was to pretend that he topped himself and see what would happen, see if like the enemy and sounds and metal, you know, the whole thing would happen, and then we'd go, fooled you. I mean, obviously that would have been a scam. You could have called that a scam. No. But I love the whole idea of the dead rock star, the whole myth of that. I mean, even going back to Elvis, when Elvis died, I was thinking, why doesn't Colonel Tom now cut him up into 1 million pieces and sell them at 1,000? You know, actually sell the bits of flesh. So, I mean, I've always been drawn to the idea of the dead pop star as a thing.
And you proposed Julian to fulfill this role.
I kind of proposed. It was going to be Ian McCulloch, but in the song, it kind of scanned. It worked better.
Do you know? I think we should hear it. Julian Cope is Dead from the solo LP The Man, 1986, by Bill Drummond, who's our guest on the evening sequence tonight on BBC6 Music.
Now, before we go on from that, I'd also like to say, I think Julian Cope, I'll get shot for this, I think he's the most talented, complete individual of that kind of generation in Liverpool. He had it all within him, you know, like Ian McCulloch had a fantastic voice, and Will Sargent, fantastic guitarist, but Julian is and will always be a complete artist, and whatever he's doing will be genuinely the right thing for him to be doing, and it's great when you see people who can be in control of their career and what they're doing, and that's something that Julian will always have.
So, Bill, your solo career as a solo artist didn't last.
No. I didn't ever mean to have a solo career. I was leaving the music business. This was going to be I'd had enough of the music business. In 1986, I was going to completely get it out of my system and get on with writing. That's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to write an album in a week and record it in a week and have it out in the next week. I wanted it to look like a Phil Oakes album. Not that any of your listeners, well, maybe some of them know who Phil Oakes is. Okay, but I wanted to have that kind of pre Dylan Electric look to it. If not the sound, maybe, but that's what I wanted it to look like.
Have you invented many kind of fictional careers over the years? I mean, in your book 45, in that you mentioned the idea of cooking up bands. Was it in Finland?
It was in Finland, yes.
You invented several biographies and several sets of song titles, and you even had individuals in the bands, and they're completely fictional.
Absolutely. Well, I've never knowingly done that before. Although some people can think that all pop music is fiction in a sense that we all. But that came about. I did a book with Mark Manning, who was also known at the time as Zodiac Mind Warp. We did a joint book, and the book was called Bad Wisdom, and it was about our attempt to get to the North Pole, to place an icon of Elvis Presley at the top of the earth. And on this journey, we drove up through we got the train through Finland, and then we drove as far as the top of Norway, thinking that the Arctic Ocean was going to be frozen. We did it in winter, and we got there and it wasn't frozen. So our idea that we could drive to the North Pole, came a bit. I mean, other things happened. But after we'd done it, and after we'd written the book up of this journey, we often talked about the tracks we'd heard while we were driving on the kind of local radio stations. We thought, it wouldn't be great if we tracked those tracks down and licensed them, put them out as an album. So we went over to Finland, found the radio stations, went through all their archive of their playlists, found the records, listened to them, and they were crap. They were useless, but in our heads we could hear what they should be. So we decided to record a whole album. We'd write the songs first, which we did over here, go to Finland, find musicians and singers, and say, okay, and now you lot here are going to be Christina Bruch. She was one of the artists, and so we recorded all these tracks, and I loved doing that. I loved putting it together, and it was very incredibly proud of the tracks we had made. Brought them back here. We pressed up, 500 of each of these as singles, and we released them in Finland so they could export it from there. There was going to be an album. Major record companies wanted to get involved, and suddenly it was all like, oh my God, I'm slipping back into the music business. I do not want to do this. So I kind of froze the whole thing.
Are those singles in existence still?
Some got out there, yes. I mean, and some agree, but it was, I was also sick in myself. I'm thinking, well, I'm just doing a pastiche. This isn't for real. It's like I didn't like that. I mean, as much as I loved doing it and thought they were great or some of them were great records.
I think it's extraordinary. It pre-shadows the whole thing that's actually happening for real now. That all
which is what
the bands are coming out of Scandinavia, and taking the British market by storm. They could have been you 10 years previously.
I don't know.
Right, the KLF. There's no avoiding it.
Okay, yeah.
This is the project that kind of took you to global, international fame, and which still, in a sense, hangs like a ball and chain onto your leg because people loved it so much, and it sort of seems to have constricted you. How do you feel about the KLF after all this time?
What's great is we stopped when we wanted to stop. Jimmy and I never fell out. We still get on. We set out at the time, this is late 86, and we didn't do our first recording until beginning of 87. We both, although we'd sort of backgrounds in guitar music, white, British, all that kind of stuff, we wanted to dump all of that. We'd come across samplers. It was, dumping the whole history of pop music and starting again by just sampling things and building things up like that. That was incredibly exciting to me. And that's after I'd been out of, I'd got myself out of the music business for about 6 months at that point, and then started doing this with Jimmy. And then it just kind of roller coasted. To begin with, we were calling ourselves the Justified Ancients of Moo Moo. And in our heads, we still think that's what we were all along. The other things, we did one-off record as the Time Lords, as a kind of novelty one. And then we became the KLF. But in our heads, we were always the Justified Ancients of Moo Moo.
Yeah, I mean, even on Justified and Ancient, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were always referencing that. So we never set out at all to be this kind of global, international, multi-whatever, successful dance, pop, crossover, whatever it was. That was never part of the game plan. It just somehow... That said, we were both, when we started making records that could work within the kind of the restrictions of pop music, we loved doing that, and we crafted those records as well as we could craft them.
Was there just like a basic ambivalence right at the heart of how you felt about the whole thing that was bound to kind of pull it apart after a while?
The fact that we were both in our 30s, at the start of it, the fact that, so it wasn't like we had these rock dreams. So we weren't driven by that, late teens, early 20s. Hey, come on, let's come on, girls, where are you? It wasn't fueled by any of that. And we were doing it, we had no manager. I can't say we were managing ourselves, but we had no manager. It was our own record label. We were in complete control, and those are all things that I'd have aspired to all along. And I thought that was great that we did all this without having any of that
at all, completely on your own terms.
Yeah,
and yet your luck to come through.
Yep, and
you had to make them as great as you could in pop terms.
Yep.
And you paid the price. Mass success.
Absolutely. And I know, obviously, I can be pleased about the mass success. It's fantastic. And I often used to sort of berate, even though I'd said that about the Bunnymen earlier, bands who thought they were big. And I was thinking, but you're not. Pop is global.
Do you think you could put your fingers in your ears for 4 minutes and just bear it while we played a bit of 3am Eternal?
Oh, please, not that one. Please,
okay.
That is just so bad, that.
Which one could you bear to let us play, even if you're not going to listen to it?
Either the one Justified and Ancient, or I can't even remember what it's called now. The one that's got the big sounds like the big country in the middle. Diddle. I can't remember.
Last Train to Transcentral.
That's it. Last Train to Transcentral.
That'll be the one. Last Train to Transcentral. Played under protest. Performed by Jimmy Corti and Bill Drummond, who's my guest this evening on the evening sequence here on BBC6 Music. It is a bizarre thing, but a number of people who have mass success do end up hating the thing that the public most liked that they did. You get the the Kinks refusing to play Waterloo Sunset at the end of the show. Or there is that syndrome, isn't there, that you get constrained by something and restricted by it and tied down by it and defined by it. It's quite hard to break out the box.
I mean, it's not that I hate them. It's like, if, you know, the 3 a.m, I just think it was badly made. We didn't actually make it as good as we should have made it. But there's nothing worse, and I don't know how you feel about this, because you still perform your own songs, but to go out and perform songs or do things that you did at a different era in your life, it's a strange thing. In one sense, I can totally understand if that's what Ray Davies... Well, actually, I know he does, because I went along to see the Kinks about 7 years ago, and they just did this medley at the end, and I was horrified at hearing them do this medley, you know.
Because in a sense, the songs don't belong to him anymore, they belong to us, the audience.
I'd have rather he didn't do it.
Yeah.
I'd have rather they did whatever songs he's written in the past couple of years. At least he let his brother sing
Death of a Clown.
Death of a Clown, even though he was taking the piss out of him behind his back, which I could have gone and kicked him for, but...
It's not really a respectful relationship, is it, those two? Well, now, could you tell us the story of how you came to collaborate with, of all people, Tammy Wynette?
Jimmy and I were in a studio in South London. We were working on the track Justified and Ancient. There was somebody who was going to be singing, or had sung already, you know, we'd got her on the... And it just wasn't working out. And Jimmy kind of half-jokingly said to me, what this track needs is Tammy Wynette. And I've got this whole country side of... I'm a fan of country music anyway. And I went into the little room at the side, there's a phone in there. And within 20 minutes, half an hour, I don't know how long it was, but it wasn't that long, I was actually speaking to Tammy Wynette. I made one call and then another call. And I was speaking to her, and she's about to go on stage in Philadelphia or somewhere. It's one of these sort of American places you hear about. And telling her, and she was straight away, she was up for it. And we were playing the track down the phone to her. Oh, yeah. And within a few days, I was on the plane, landed at Nashville, get picked up by her husband in George Ritchie, in his powder blue Jag, taken to First Lady Acres, you know, with the classic big white gates that electronically open, driven up the drive into the house, and I hear this voice, "Hey Bill, is that you? Why don't you just come?" And it's just Tammy Wynette talking to me, and I was I've got all the Tammy and the George Jones albums. I'm a massive fan, and she's got this boudoir upstairs, and she's all been done up by her beautician, her personal beautician, to go to the studio that night. I mean, she's like totally...
it's great to put on the makeup to go to the studio.
And have the hair done. The whole lot. But after she's all done up, and we go down, and they have this massive music room? But anyway, they had a big white grand piano, and I'm sitting at the white grand piano playing Justified and Ancient, and her trying to sing along, and my hands are shaking trying to do the chords, you know. But we got down to the studio that night, and we recorded, or we started recording it, and she was rubbish. She was complete. And how do you tell Tammy Wynette, I'm afraid, Tammy, it's not working? But it just wasn't. And she'd actually never sung. She'd always sung to her band. You know, her and the band would go into the studio, or the musicians that she's working with, and they'd lay down the backing tracks with her singing, and as if they were following. When she slows down, they'd all slow down, and she'd never sung to machines. And obviously that's what Jimmy and I dealt with, machines. She just couldn't keep, sing in time with this thing. And her husband George, who's a really good musician, songwriter as well, came out, and he sort of took her through it, like stood right in front of her and mouthed the words and kind of conducted her through it. And even that didn't quite work out. And so when I flew back home and got back with Jimmy, and I said, look, it's a complete disaster. I've failed us, you know. But the engineer, Mark Stent, who we were working with, he just got this new bit of studio gear, where you could speed things up and shrink things down and stretch, and which everybody uses that now, but then not coming. And he said, we can handle that. And within a couple of hours we got the whole thing working, and it all worked in place.
So that isn't how she actually sung it?
I'm afraid no, we had to use the trickery of the studio. I mean, I'm not trying to take anything away from her. It's her greatness that meant that she couldn't, the reality of her craft meant she couldn't sing with whatever we were presenting, but we did mess around with her.
Let's hear it right now. They're justified, and they're ancient, and they drive an ice cream van. That's Tammy Wynette with the KLF, here on BBC6 Music, where my guest is Bill Drummond, the man responsible for that particular collaboration. It's great to just pick up a phone and be able to get through and make things happen like that, Bill, isn't it?
Yes. It was something I was taught in 1975 by a person called Ken Campbell, a theatre director, and I used to be a theatre designer before, and he taught me that everybody, you can get anybody in the world near enough on the phone.
Have you worked with Ken Campbell in the intervening years since? Do you keep in touch with him?
I do, yeah. I do.
It's one of the funniest shows I've ever seen in my life.
Which
the Ken
one?
Campbell Roadshow.
Yeah. He's gone and done things over the years. Yeah, he's fantastic. He's been, as an individual that I've worked with, I think he's had more influence on me than anybody. We were talking about the Teardrop Explodes earlier, and I remember Dave Balfe and I had a feeling, we had a problem about the Teardrop Explodes, thinking they're just dull. And we went to see Ken Campbell and said, look, we're working with this band, they're called the Teardrop Explodes, they're dull. And he just said, well, they've got to be wilder. And said, well, aren't you going to tell us anything else? Says, if you give me £100 now, I'll tell you something else. So we gave him £100. We went out, got £100. We came back, gave him £100. Says, call their next album Wilder. So, I mean, that's a long time ago. But that was an influence he had on me.
When you decided to call it a day, why did you call a halt to the musical side of what you were doing and move into, I don't know how we describe it,
whatever else it is, the
next phase,
the other stuff. I was 39 at the time, and pop music, I did not have the hold over me. I mean, it never had complete hold over me anyway. I was always somebody that read, history of art, and read all sorts of stuff. I tried to stop being involved in pop music earlier, before the KLF, and I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm just going to end up being one of these sad people, And there were so many other things I wanted to do and explore. Not that I knew what they were, but I don't. As much as I was going on earlier about the kind of myth of pop music, I wanted to completely destroy all that. I wanted to have none of that myth hanging around me, or what I was involved with, and just get on with stuff.
As far as I know, you are the only man to have publicly burned £1 million in cash.
I'm afraid. Well, it was 500,000. Jimmy burnt the other 500,000. But yes, I know what you mean.
I think that's extraordinary. An extraordinary statement. How do you feel about it after all this time? Are you still really proud?
Yeah, I suppose I am. Yeah, I can be proud. Yeah, I can think. Yeah, I've done that. I mean, there's plenty of days that I think, oh shit, and it's a pretty difficult one to explain to the children. And
how come we don't have that million now?
And it's always something there, so hanging around you. You meet somebody and think, hang on a minute, even if they don't know anything about the pop records, even if they don't know anything about you, aren't you that bloke that burnt? It's like something you got to.
But I just think, there are people who've put £1 million worth of cocaine up their nose over the course of a 20-year period, and it's a so much more interesting thing to have done.
That's part of the reason, actually. I used to have this thing, it really got to me about whatever genre of pop music somebody was coming out of, it always seemed to end up in the back of toilets in Soho snorting cocaine. And that really, I mean, I'm not saying here I haven't done my fair share of whatever that is, but anyway, that's another whole subject.
Bill, have you caught up with what your erstwhile bandmate Ian Brody's doing at the moment?
Before I came in to talk with you, Tom, I met up with one of my sons, James, and he's 17. He works in an independent record shop in Aylesbury, near where I live. And they had they had Ian's new album on. I was like, oh, this sounds good. Who's this? And I was thinking, well, I could hear it was a Liverpool thing. And I was thinking, well, it's not the choral. It's not Shaka. It's not. I'm going through all the things in my head, and then James, my son, said, oh, that's Ian Brody. He's got a solo album out. So he showed me the cover of it, and he was buying it that day for his mum, my ex-missus. And I liked the cover. And I liked the 2 tracks I heard. I can't remember what they were called, but I liked them.
Okay, well, this is the single. This is for Song for No One. BBC6 Music, that's Song for No One, the current single from Ian Brodie, whose erstwhile bandmate from Big in Japan, Bill Drummond, has been my guest over the course of this hour. Bill, what are you up to at the moment? I presume you're not making records in any shape or form.
No, I'm not making records. I'm actually doing a lot of different things, not all at the same time, but concurrently, and most of them are very low-key things. One thing that I've been doing for the past couple of years is an exhibition. It works as a talk as well, or a performance thing for myself, called How to Be an Artist, which it isn't about how to be an artist at all. It's just a title. So I've been touring that for the past couple of years, but I don't do that all the time. It's just one of the things I've been doing.
Let's finish with your greatest artist. I mean, there are so many great artists. I mean, how can you pick one? But if you had to pick an iconic great artist of all time,
Elvis Presley. He was my first love, my greatest love. I've actually got kind of over it. No, the only reason was that I've made sure I never listen to Elvis. I mean, I make sure I never hear it. But for me, I remember the first time I saw Elvis as a kid in '62, I think. I mean, the best part of what is perceived to be the best part of his career had already come and gone by then. He was already making what we understand it to be the crap films. And this film I'd gone off to see by myself in the local picture house, and it was roustabout. And the opening shot is of this truck going through, not pickup truck, lorry, going through these wooded mountain things. And then you see the camera pulls back, and you see this young man sitting on the tailgate of the truck, and I'm thinking, that looks fantastic. I want to be that man. I want to sit on that tailgate. This guy's got to be the coolest person in the world. This is in the head of a 8-year-old, 9-year-old lad. So at that point, I didn't know he was Elvis Presley. I didn't know he sang. But later in the film, I heard him singing, and I'm thinking, this is just genius. This is fantastic. And that was the beginning of my love affair with Elvis. I then became aware of the other stuff, but I loved everything he ever did. And for every time I would hear...
But you can't say Blue Suede Shoes is the equal of Crying in the Chapel.
All I can say is it emotionally affects me just as much. So, if I was to hear Crying in the Chapel today, I mean, I genuinely have tears running down my... And I think if you were to play me Blue Suede Shoes, I'd go, oh yeah, Scotty. If it was Scotty Moore playing on the guitar, I don't know. Yeah, he sounds pretty good. But if I was to hear Crying in the Chapel, if that's the one you mentioned, then I'd be just, and those kind of harmonies at the background. I mean, I just love it.
Bill Drummond, it's been such a pleasure to meet you this evening. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Elvis Presley, Crying in the Chapel.
You saw me crying in